Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Tamma Nicholson. I'm the program manager for the Career Training USA program at InterExchange. I'm joined by my colleague, Abigail Grazel. Abigail, let you introduce yourself.
Hi, yeah, as Timon said, I'm Abigail Grazel, and I am the Participant Services Coordinator in the Career Training Department.
Great. We are really excited I'm really excited to present this webinar. This is the 9th of 10 webinars that we've conducted this spring about career guidance, tips and advice. We've covered things from searching for internships in the US to creating cover letters and resumes to perfecting your LinkedIn profile, all of the aspects of pulling together an international internship application. And today we're going to cover English in the workplace. So maybe some tools that you'll need once you actually do arrive in the United States, perhaps later this summer or this fall, some of the different cultural nuances. If this is the first webinar that you've been able to attend and you're unfamiliar with InterExchange, just a bit of background about our organization. We are a nonprofit based in New York City, and our mission is to promote cross-cultural exchange for students overseas to come to the United States and participate in various cultural exchange programs, and then also for students in the US to go overseas and partake in similar type programs. The Career Training USA program in particular works with students and young professionals who have internships or traineeships in the United States and are seeking to come here and build skills and learn related to their studies. With the pandemic worldwide, there's been less opportunity for people to travel and experience internships in other countries or in person, but we know there's a lot of interest and there's been a lot of great questions that we've received over the last few months. So we hope these webinars will be helpful for you as you plan for your internship in the United States. There's more on our YouTube video if you'd like to go back and see some of those past topics that I've talked about. A bit of housekeeping before I turn it over to Abby to begin the English in the US workplace presentation. Everyone on the call is muted right now, so if you do have any questions, please just type them into the chat box. We have some pauses throughout the program where we'll go through and we'll read any questions that have come in. But if there's anything that you want us to answer, just type that away and we'll get to that as it relates to the presentation. Lastly, the session is recorded and we'll put it on YouTube. So if you do need to leave early, or if you missed the beginning of it, or you want to see some stuff later next week or in the future, you can find that on our YouTube link and we'll send that to everyone after this presentation concludes. But with that, Abby, I will toss it over to you to get us started.
Wonderful, thank you, Tamon. So as Tamon was saying, we're going to discuss English in the US workplace. Here is an outline of today's session. This is a very broad topic, so there are a lot of different items that we could address. We didn't want to give a purely basic, English grammar webinar, but we did want to highlight some, terms perhaps in the office that you might encounter, that sort of thing. So, these are some of the topics we're going to discuss today. We'll start with the company overview, some of those terms. We'll move on to some ways you can prepare to socialize with your coworkers. We'll discuss speaking on the phone and writing emails. And then we'll end with a list, quite a list of professional idioms. We'll discuss exactly what an idiom is and what the kind of idioms you can expect to encounter when you're here in the US. Okay, so with that, let's get started with the company overview. If it's your first day at a new internship, these are some of the terms that you're going to want to be familiar with. The first one you'll maybe encounter is the word onboarding. Onboarding means the process of getting a new employee set up to work for the company. So it's kind of an important one to know for your first couple of days in the office. You'll probably hear something similar to it. This just means that the company is going to give you all of the tax paperwork that you need to fill out. They'll make sure your physical workspace is set up so that you have a desk and a mouse and a keyboard, that you have access to, all of the databases that you need to have access to. Basically anything that needs to be done before you can actually begin working is considered onboarding. And then below that, here we have listed out various departments that may be in your company. Please do remember that every company is different. So if you come into a small company, they might not have every one of these departments. And maybe someone is both human resources and IT, for example, if it's a smaller company. I don't want to read through every definition, but I do want to just touch base with HR and IT. HR stands for Human Resources. IT stands for Information Technology. So these terms, often referred to as HR, IT, they are acronyms. So acronyms are words or names formed using the first letter of longer names or phrases. And there are a lot of common acronyms in business English, which can sometimes make it a bit confusing if you don't know what the longer name or word is. Human resources, IT, those are ones you'll probably hear as they're pretty common across all industries. But there are specific acronyms within each industry and sometimes even within each company. So you're going to want to make sure to ask your coworkers or a supervisor if you're not sure what they're talking about because you've never heard an acronym before. It may be specific to each company. So if you've never worked at this company before, you may have no idea what they're talking about, and that's okay. For example, here at Interexchange, we have a database called FileMaker, and a lot of times we'll abbreviate it or make it an acronym and refer to it as FM. So if you weren't a part of our company, you wouldn't know what that means. It's okay if you ask if you're not sure what an acronym is referring to. And so some other terms you should be aware of as an employee are some HR terms listed here. Team building, this might be something that you do early on in a new internship, especially if you're coming over with other interns or something like that. They're usually games or activities that are meant to be fun to help a team learn from each other. It helps build rapport. It gives you a better camaraderie and helps you work better and more efficiently together. It improves your collaboration skills. So this might be something you can expect, some team building activities. If these are offered, we highly recommend that you join. Sometimes they might happen during the workday, other times you might be offered to do an activity outside of the workday. But it's an easy way to experience American culture and to share your own culture with your coworkers, which is a big component of the J1 program. So we do highly recommend you join those activities. Past participants have also said that, saying yes to as many activities as they were invited to has allowed them to experience a lot of the US and were some of the favorite parts of their program. If we move down, PTO is another acronym you might want to know. A lot of times this means paid time off. So this is just, vacation days or time that you can expect to receive off. If you joined our webinar last week about about intercultural communication in the US office culture. We talked a little bit about, what kind of vacation days you can expect. If you weren't able to attend, do check that out on our YouTube. The most important thing to remember is that you'll have to discuss your paid time off with your supervisor, usually before you take it off. And so it's just good to prepare for that in advance. And then we do have a performance review one-on-one. That's a meeting between two people. Performance review, this is something you might hear. Most likely you won't be subject to one of these because you are coming as an intern or trainee, as an exchange visitor who's not here long-term. So most likely this won't affect you because you will be evaluated according to the methods outlined in your training plan. But it's good to know this term in case you hear your coworkers talking about it. It's a method that normal employees often go to be evaluated by their supervisors. Okay, so let's move on to talking about socializing with your coworkers. You know, you do want to come over for that cultural exchange. You want to get to know who you'll be working with and, you know, share your own culture with them as well. So it's good to have some tools to help you prepare for conversations with your coworkers. So the first thing you'll want to know are water cooler conversations. So these are casual discussions between coworkers about non-related topics. So if you see the picture here, this is an example of a water cooler conversation. You know, this references a time when employees would take breaks and they'd gather around the water cooler in the break room to talk. So these days, you know, water cooler conversations, that references any in-office socialization. So maybe even gossip or, you know, these conversations that can happen anywhere. So not just at the water cooler, but it just essentially means, you know, socializing with your coworkers, not talking about work per se, but talking about anything that would be considered a water cooler conversation. So, you know, what can these conversations look like? A lot of times they consist of small talk. So small talk is polite, unimportant conversation in a social setting. And Americans, we really love small talk. So you can expect to have a lot of conversations like these. Typically, you know, Americans don't really like awkward silences. So you might have small talk with a stranger, for example, in an elevator or while you're waiting for the bus, maybe while you're in line at the supermarket. You know, you might find yourself having small talk with a stranger standing next to you. But it can also happen with, you know, your coworkers who maybe you don't know so well. You run into them in the break room. You might have a little bit of small talk, you know, just to have a good relationship with them, even though it's more of a casual acquaintance. So, you know, if you do run into a coworker, it's not uncommon to say hello to someone in the morning, even if you don't really know them well. It is considered polite to say good morning back and maybe ask how they're doing. But do remember that Americans don't always expect a response to the question, how are you? A lot of times this is more of a greeting. You know, as you're walking past, you say, hi, how are you? The other person says, oh, I'm good. How are you? And then they keep walking. So it's not an in-depth conversation. It's more of a greeting. And this might be different from the culture you come from. So just know if someone asks, how are you? It's more like them saying hi a lot of the time. So under here, we have listed some small talk topics. So these are some ideas of conversations you can have with coworkers. So you can talk about sports, you can talk about weekend or vacation plans, maybe popular television shows, food, or the weather. You will find yourself talking about the weather quite often, so get used to talking about how windy it is outside one day. But you do want to keep in mind that small talk isn't meant to be controversial. So you do want to keep your topics light and casual. Americans value their privacy, especially at work. So it's not typically considered appropriate to ask a coworker about their age or their weight, their politics, or other personal matters. You know, obviously this will depend on your relationship with each coworker. Maybe you become closer to someone and you become friends outside of the office. You know, that would make your relationship different. But in general, you want to keep your small talk light, casual, and easy. Okay, I think already, if you can believe it, we do have a quick break for questions. Tammin, have any come in?
So far, we have just one question that's come in, and it's related to a slide or two ago when you were talking about acronyms. Is there a way, or how can someone know which acronyms their host will use in advance?
Yeah, a good question. So it's difficult to know exactly which acronyms they're going to use. As I did explain, it can be specific to each company. So that would be a little bit difficult. But you could do a bit of research on your industry before you come do your internship. And that way you can see what some common acronyms are that are going to be used in your industry. So for example, there's probably acronyms that everyone in the architecture world uses, and maybe doing a little bit of research now can help you be prepared when you come. Or, accounting, they're going to have their own acronyms as well. So it's good to do a little bit of research before, that way you're better prepared when you arrive.
Great, thank you.
Great. All right. With that, then let's head to talking about phone conversations. So this can be nerve-wracking, when you are in the US or if you're speaking in a new language. If English isn't your native language, speaking to anyone in English can be a bit nerve-wracking, but I know speaking on the phone can make it even more difficult. A lot of English speakers don't like to speak on the phone with other English speakers. So if it's not your native language, it can be, even more scary. But it's okay to be nervous. Just a little bit of preparation, again, can help you feel a bit more comfortable. And the main thing to remember about speaking on the phone is that it's important to be extra polite since people can't read your body language. This can lead to some miscommunications if you're maybe not able to read someone's body language, maybe their tone of voice is confusing. So in order to avoid any miscommunication, you want to be as clear and polite as possible, especially if you're speaking to customers. So your company might have a standard greeting that they want everyone to use. So be sure to ask your supervisor or coworkers. Typically, they'll want you to make sure you say your name and maybe your company's name. So I do have a couple of examples here about, if you first initially answer the phone, what you can say. So you might say, for example, "Hi, this is Abby. How can I help you?" Or you can answer, "Thanks for calling Interexchange. This is Abby." Anything like that is generally pretty accepted in terms of answering the phone and your initial greeting. And then how do you respond when someone asks you a question? I have listed some common responses here that are answers to common questions. Again, I want to emphasize the importance of being polite and formal on the phone. So you'll want to make sure to say something like, "May I ask who's calling?" rather than "Who are you?" Because just saying "Who are you?" could come across as rude. So you want to try to be a bit more formal. Find some of those formal languages and phrases like, "May I ask who's calling?" Again, you might want to say, "I'm sorry, could you please repeat that?" if you don't know what they're saying. You know, you want to just make sure to be as polite as possible. So for example, if you can't understand someone, make sure to politely ask them to repeat what they said. Don't say, "What did you say?" Because you'll maybe want to say, "I'm sorry, could you please repeat that?" Or maybe you want to say, "Can you please hold?" instead of "Wait 1 second." And then another just tip to remember about phones, can be a bit confusing because your phone at the office might have a lot of buttons, but if you do have to put someone on hold, just make sure to click the actual button. that way to put them officially on hold. That way they can't hear your conversation in the background because that can come across as unprofessional. So don't just hold the phone near your ear while you're asking a question to a coworker. You want to actually put the person on the call on hold so that they can't hear your conversation. So you know about phones, you know about socializing with your coworkers. The next big item you want to make sure you have an understanding of is email. So, you know, email does sort of have its own culture in the business world. You'll find yourself sending a lot of emails most likely. So it's important to kind of know what to expect and the best ways to respond. Much like speaking on the phone, it's typically better to be polite and formal in your emails to avoid misinterpretation or misunderstanding. So you want to be more formal, you know, more careful in your emails than you are in maybe your text messages to friends or anything like that. So we have highlighted some email terms here. You can see that we have two more acronyms, CC, which is carbon copy, and BCC, which is blind carbon copy. Using the CC line can be very useful and save you time, but you do want to be careful how you use it. CCing, for example, someone's manager could come across as rude or aggressive. You know, especially if you've been waiting on a response from a coworker, they still haven't gotten back to you. So you reply and CC their manager. You know, that could come across as rude and like you're trying to tell on them. So you want to think about who you're writing the email to and who is, you know, copied on that email. And then you do want to be extra careful with blind carbon copy. So with blind copy, you know, typically you really only want to use this if you're sending out a mass email to a lot of people and you don't want everyone to get everyone else's email addresses because of privacy concerns. So honestly, that's really the only time you may want to blind copy someone. If you blind copy someone manager in the same sort of vein as you know, CCing someone's manager, that could come across as even more rude since they weren't aware that their manager was even on that email chain. So you want to be careful and make sure that you don't break any or make any bad relationships with your coworkers by accidentally making a mistake in email. And then we do have reply all, and forward. When should you reply and when should you reply all? Often it's better to reply all if you want everyone who's copied on the email to have the information in your answer. So if someone responds to your message and copies someone new, most likely they want them to be aware of this email conversation. So it's polite to reply all so that that person stays on that chain. One of the few times you would maybe just reply is if you're the recipient of a group message asking you to RSVP to a meeting. Typically, you'll just want to reply to the sender so that everyone on the email chain doesn't receive excessive emails that aren't relevant to them. So your coworker might not need to know that you're not able to make the meeting, but your manager who organized it does need to know. So that might be a time when you would just reply instead of reply all. So if we move on, we have a few more email terms. We have an email thread or chain. You can use those interchangeably. I think maybe I said both of those terms in the last slide. So, you know, you can use them both. Attachment and spam, email signature, subject line, and phishing. So for an email thread or email chain, if you're added to an email in the middle of a conversation, you want to make sure to read the whole email chain before you contribute to the conversation. So you don't want to ask a question that maybe was answered a few emails back before you were copied. So just go back and read what everyone has already said before you send your own reply. For email signatures, this is the text at the bottom of an email where you list your name and your contact information. Your company might have a standard email signature that they want everyone to use. So you can use that as a template. And that's just good to ask your supervisor about. And then phishing, this is kind of an odd word. Oh, sorry, I wanted to talk about spam first. So spam are unasked for emails that are sent to a large number of recipients, usually by companies for marketing purposes or other unwanted reasons. So most emails, like Gmail, for example, have built-in filters that send unwanted emails to a spam folder so they don't clutter your inbox. But sometimes these filters may send an email you did want to see to this folder on accident. So it is sometimes good to get in the habit of checking your spam folder regularly to see if you missed any important emails. But you do want to be careful what you click on in your spam folder because you don't want to fall for a phishing email. So phishing is an attempt by criminals to get access to your personal or financial information by pretending to be from someone you trust. So it's really important to be careful on what you click on in email. And your company may even ask that you go through technology training when you first start, so you can learn about avoiding these types of emails so that you don't get hacked or put any company information in jeopardy. So that's just something to remember about phishing and spam. Just be careful on what you click on. So email structure, what does a typical email look like in the English world and the business world here in the US? So here we have some standard greetings, opening lines, closing greetings. Basically, the formality of your email will depend on who it is you're emailing. So if we start with on the left side with greetings, the first line is the most formal. So dear Dr. Miller, there, dear is already pretty formal. And then you're referring to someone by their title, so Dr. Miller. So this would be if you're emailing a client you've never met before, or anyone you want to be very polite and formal with. The next one below, hello, Miss Gray. This is a little bit more casual, but still referring to Miss Gray by her title. So it maybe is someone you met once and now you're sending a follow-up email. Maybe you drop the dear and just say hello because you've already spoken with them. And then hi, Tom. This is the least formal. So this might be the greeting you send to a coworker, just checking in with them. You might say, oh, hi, Tom. That is probably you most of the time, depending on the industry you're in. Maybe you wouldn't send this the first time to a client, but again, it depends on the culture of your industry and your company. And then some typical opening lines, maybe you say exactly why you're calling. So you might say, I'm writing, or calling while you're emailing. So you might say, I'm writing with an update on our project. Maybe you thank them for responding to you. So thanks for getting back to me. Maybe you do a little bit of small talk in your first line and you say, I hope you're doing well. Those are all different options depending on what you're going for in your email. And then some closing lines. Maybe you want to make sure they respond to you. So you might say, I look forward to hearing from you. Maybe you want to make sure they know they can reach out to you. So you might say, please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions. Or again, the last line is maybe a bit of small talk in email. You might say, have a great weekend. And then in closing greetings, again, it sort of starts with the most formal at the top. So sincerely generally is what you would sign off when you say dear at the beginning. So sincerely is the most formal. Kind regards and all the best are two typical closing greetings you see in a lot of business emails. So those are just two options that you have that you can send to most anyone. Okay, and then on the next slide, we do just have a brief photo example here of an email. So if you see at the top, we have the subject line, which is what you see when you first click on an email. You can see I sent the email, and then Fatima and Crystal were CC'd, so they were copied on this email. It was to both of them. And then at the bottom, you can see I signed all the best, and I signed with my name, Abby. And then underneath that is my email signature. So this explains exactly who I am, what company I work for, and includes our phone number, our address, everything that anyone needs to know to contact me. And then at the bottom, we do have an attachment. This is any document that you attach to an email, typically found at the bottom. Some email tips, some tips you should be aware of when writing emails. So business writing is clear and concise. So you want to make sure that you use simple language. As we said before, make sure to judge your audience. So emails to coworkers can be more casual, quick, conversational. Emails to clients might be more formal. We do recommend that you sign your email with your preferred name. So if you remember in the last slide, my email signature has my name as Abigail, but I signed it as Abby. This lets people know what they can refer to you as in their response to you. So, I go by Abby often. Maybe your name is Thomas, but you prefer to go by Tom. You would want to sign your email as Tom so that the person who responds knows what to call you. You might want to even consider adding your gender pronoun to your email signature. So do you go by she and hers, or do you go by he and his, or maybe you go by they? It's just good, especially if you're coming from a non-English speaking country. A lot of Americans may not have ever seen your name before. So they might not be aware if your name is typically a female name or typically a male name. So adding your pronoun could help to save some embarrassment because it would help them know what you prefer, what you go by. You want to make sure to avoid all caps. So all caps is when all of your letters are capitalized, like this, underlined here. Typically in English, this means that you're shouting or angry. So you really shouldn't ever use all caps, especially in emails, because you don't want people to think you're yelling at them. And then the subject line, make sure to write a short, strong subject line. So this is the first text that your reader sees of your email. So you want to make sure your subject line is short and gets to the point. You want to make sure that your email gets read, and how quickly it gets read depends on the subject line. So make sure to summarize the content of the email and include any action that you might want your reader to take. So some examples would be reminder, sales report due tomorrow. And then once you've written your email, you want to make sure to go back and edit for typos. So typos are typographical error or mistakes made in the typing process. So if you accidentally, wrote the with TTE, you want to go back and make sure you catch that and fix it before you send it. So we recommend that you do read your message out loud, especially if it's the first email that you're sending to a client. By reading your message out loud, you're able to check for awkward phrasing that maybe doesn't say exactly what you want it to say. So go edit for those typos and read your message to kind of make sure it flows properly. And then you want to watch out for those tricky English words that sound the same but have different spellings and meanings. So your email, like Gmail, probably includes software such as spell check or Grammarly that will let you know if something is spelled wrong or if it doesn't make sense, those red lines underneath words. But these softwares will probably miss words that are spelled correctly, but they have a different meaning than what you meant to say. These are called English homophones. So these are exactly words that are pronounced the same but have different meanings and oftentimes different spellings. So there are a lot of these in English, and in the next slide we are going to outline a few because these are some ones that may come up as you're writing an email. So here's the list. The first one is do and do. So do is an action and the other do is a deadline. So an example sentence of them both being used. I'll do it. When is it due? So when is the deadline? I want to make sure I get it done. There, and there. So an example sentence of them, all of them are, they're taking their chairs over there. So those are all three being used. So, they are taking the chairs that they own over to a different location, to a different place. No and no. So I'll ask my boss, but I know he's going to say no. So I have knowledge, I am aware, I believe that my boss is going to not let me go, to say no. 4 and 4. We got a cake for Lisa's birthday. The party is at 4. So we're going to celebrate Lisa's birthday with cake. Come to the conference room at 4 p.m. because that's when we're having the party. 2, 2, and 2. So we've got 2 people going to the conference already, but I think Steve wanted to go too. So, 2 people are going to this conference. Steve also wants to go. Write and write. So Heather is right. We should write our own newsletter. So she wants to be a writer. She's correct that you should make your own newsletter. Hour and hour. We'll have an hour at the conference for our presentation. So we have 60 minutes to give the presentation that we've been working on. And then week and week. Our sales pitch is a bit weak. Next week, let's see what we can do to make it better. So, if it's lacking strength, you want to give yourself a week to try to have a better presentation. So those are some homophones you can expect. Make sure to check your email to watch out for any of these that maybe are using the incorrect one in a message. Okay, I do want to pause once more for questions. Tammin, have we had any more come in?
So far, 2 more questions have come in. The first one is, what should I do if both of these go back, I think, earlier to when you were talking about etiquette. What should I do if I accidentally copy someone on an email?
Yeah, this can be hard. If you use Gmail and you notice the mistake as soon as you hit send, then you may be able to stop the email from sending. Gmail does a lot of times have that unsend or undo option for, I think you can set how long you want it, but I think it can be up to like 3 seconds or 5 seconds. So if you notice it right away, sometimes you can undo sending the email. But if you notice it later, you'll probably want to resend the email, taking that person off so that way they don't get any replies. If you don't want them to be included in that chain, you'll have to restart the whole chain. Maybe you can send a brief apology and say that you wanted to resend to make sure the correct people were copied. And then you might want to send a separate email to the person who was included by mistake and just tell them to disregard it.
Great, thank you. The other question is it necessary to place a comma behind the greeting and behind the closing greeting? And not, if that's not standard in every country, is that necessary in US email etiquette?
Oh, that's a great question. Often, yes. So emails a lot of times kind of are similar to writing a letter. So back in the old days when people wrote on actual paper, you would always have the greeting, and after the greeting, you always put a comma, and then after the closing greeting, you also put a comma. So, if you don't put a greeting at all, you don't need a comma, but yes, if at the beginning of the email, if you say, hello, Miss Gray, hi, Tom, dear Dr. Miller, you want to make sure to put that comma because that is common practice and is proper grammar in English.
Great, yeah, and I would note you might see people who use hyphen, or you might see people use a semicolon or something like that in their greeting, but most likely in US correspondence, like Abby said, comma is the way to go.
Yeah, that's a good point. If it's a less formal email, they might not include the comma, but if you want it to be formal, then you should probably use a comma.
Excellent, thank you. Those are all the questions so far.
Great. Okay, so we will move on to the last part of the presentation where we're going to discuss idioms. So idioms can be confusing to non-native speakers as a lot of times the individual words in the phrase together don't make sense. So an idiom is a phrase or a group of words with a figurative meaning that is typically understood culturally. A lot of times the words individually don't make sense. So it's raining cats and dogs. That doesn't mean that there's actual cats and dogs coming from the sky. That can be confusing if you don't know what they mean. It's raining cats and dogs because you can see there's no cats or dogs raining. So what they actually means is that it's raining very heavily. So it has a figurative meaning. And it can be difficult for a lot of people because if you don't know what the idiom means, then it might be hard to understand. So essentially, you basically have to learn idioms by using them frequently and trying to memorize them. That way, you know what is being referenced. So this can make mastering a new language difficult. And there are a lot of idioms in the business world in English, unfortunately. But we have gone through and listed some out here. We're going to go through them. And familiarizing yourself with some of these idioms can help to increase your understanding when you do come to the US to do your internship. So the first three idioms that we have to talk about are kick off, show of hands, and housekeeping. So kick off means to begin or start. So you might hear your supervisor say at the beginning of a meeting, Jen, can you kick off today's meeting with a summary of what we discussed last week? So we're going to kick off the idiom list with that first one. A show of hands is a vote when people actually physically raise their hands in the air in support of a proposal. So basically a vote by raising your hand in the air. So in that same meeting, your supervisor might say, by a show of hands, who agrees with Mark's budget proposal? So if you agreed, you would put your hand in the air. If you didn't, you would leave it on the table. And then housekeeping. I think Tammin actually used this at the beginning of the webinar, so it's a good example of an idiom that a lot of times we use them and don't even realize that we're using them because they're just so ingrained to the way that we speak. But housekeeping is generally refers to tasks that must be done regularly to keep systems or a company running smoothly and efficiently. For example, at the beginning of a meeting, maybe your supervisor wants to talk to you all about your vacation days. So, talking about vacation days doesn't reference, or it's not important to the actual work that you're doing, but you need to know who's going to be in the office to make sure that that work continues to get done. So he might say a bit of housekeeping before we begin discussing the blueprints. Talk to me about your vacation days. Okay, so the next three are brainstorm, bring to the table, and learn the ropes. So brainstorm, that means to problem solve together, or to try to think as hard as you can of a bunch of new ideas. So someone might say, any thoughts on how we can improve next year's sales? Let's brainstorm. So let's try to come up with ideas. Bring to the table means to provide a skill or offer a contribution to the group effort. If Amanda is a new hire, she just started with the company, and she, was working for a similar company in the past, they might say she has a lot of experience to bring to the table. So she has a lot to offer because she's experienced this before. And then learn the ropes is to learn how a job is done. So when Amanda first starts, since she does have experience, it probably won't take her long to learn the ropes because she has done it before. This one's an interesting idiom. A lot of idioms do have referenced something in the past, or the way they came into popular conversation was, through unusual means. So learn the ropes does reference sailboats. So back in the day, new sailors had to learn how to tie knots and how to change the ropes to keep the sails up and moving. They had to, physically learn how to move the ropes. They were learning how to do their job. So now we just say that, for any job that someone is learning. So lose your train of thought. This means to forget what you were going to say. So I'm sorry, I've lost my train of thought. Get off track, also referring to trains, the train track. So this means to discuss something not related to the goal or purpose of the conversation. So maybe your supervisor might say, while I enjoy hearing about Jerry's cat, we seem to have gotten off track. We're no longer talking about the budget proposal because we're talking about Jerry's cat. So track referencing trains, you want to make sure you're on the right train track to get to where you're going. So that's why if you get off track, you're going somewhere you're not meant to be going. And then in the same idea, get back on track means to return the discussion to a topic relevant to the purpose of the conversation. So let's get back on track and discuss last quarter's sales figures. A long shot. This is something that is unlikely to happen, but worth trying for. So someone might say, it's a long shot, but I can ask my contact at the record label if he will give me the phone number for Beyonce's agent. Most likely you're not going to be able to get Beyonce to come to your event, but if you know someone, it's a long shot, you can give it a try. I think the origin of this one relates to early guns. So guns weren't always very accurate at long distances. So according to the theory, in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, a long shot had a literal definition. So it was someone shooting from a long range. Most likely they weren't going to hit the target, but they were trying. So they had a long shot. Thinking outside the box. This means to think creatively about new ideas rather than using traditional or expected ideas. So we really need to think outside of the box this year in order to top last year's event. And look at the big picture. So this means to focus on the most important aspect of something and its long-term effects rather than the small details. So someone might say, I know this proposal seems expensive right now, but we need to look at the big picture and focus on where our organization will be in the future if we don't implement it. So, don't focus on the small cost, but focus on where you'll be in the future. Look farther out. And then here, these three are talking about numbers. So we've got a few number and math idioms here. So crunch the numbers. This means to do calculations to analyze numbers and data, especially as it relates to money and budgets. So you might hear someone say, Lisa's idea is great, but we'll need to crunch the numbers to see if it's in budget for this project. So we need to do some calculations, make sure we can afford it. The bottom line, this is the final total of an account balance, typically as it relates to a company's earnings or profits. So this also used to have, or still does have, a literal definition, because if you typically have like a profit and loss statement, the physical bottom line of this statement is where the final numerical figure is placed, showing whether a company made a profit or took a loss. So a lot of times, the boss will immediately just go to the end, to the bottom line, the actual bottom line, and see how much they made that year. So a lot of times when anyone is talking about, money and profits, they might say, how will this affect our bottom line? Will I lose money from this or will I make money from this? And then a ballpark figure is a rough estimate. So the origin of this phrase comes from how a commentator would give an estimate of the number of audiences just by looking around in a ballpark. So in baseball, a lot of times the commentators back in the day will look around, as I said, and try to give a visual estimate of how many people were present to watch the baseball game. So that was a ballpark figure. So now it does still mean a rough estimate. So if you don't know the specific amount something's going to cost, that's okay. You can say, I don't know the exact number, but I can give you a ballpark. I can tell you it's going to cost closer to $50,000 than to $5,000. So that would be just kind of a ballpark figure. On the back burner, this is something that is low priority and you want to put it on hold to be developed at a later date. So this is a reference to cooking. So a cook, if you think of a stove, a lot of the times, especially in the US, there will be 4 burners, so 4 heat sources on that stove. And a cook will often place the items, the pot that needs less attention, less stirring, on the burner farther in the back. So that way they can pay more attention to those on the front burner while they're actively cooking. So that would be, putting something on the back burner because it's low priority and you want to focus on it later. To cut corners, this is to do something in the easiest, cheapest, or quickest way, especially if you're neglecting something important. So cutting corners generally has a negative connotation. It's a negative idea. So you don't really often want to cut corners because it is seen as neglecting something important and trying to be cheap. And then play by the book. This is to follow the rules and regulations exactly. So essentially, the book is referring to a rule book, for example. So if you play by the book, you're not going to agree to something that's maybe a small rule because you follow all the rules. So maybe your coworker will say, "Oh, Thomas won't approve that exception because he plays by the book. He follows all the rules. To get the ball rolling means to begin a project. So kind of, you can also say to kick off a project, you can say, let's get the ball rolling. So it just means to begin. To be up to speed is to have the latest information on a topic. You might say, your supervisor might say, Tom set a meeting with Ron to get him up to speed on this project. This one might refer to an animal performing at their best rate, such as a racing horse. So if you go and you went to choose a horse, you wanted to choose the one that looked up to speed, that was the fastest and had the best chance of, had the most information and best chance of winning. And then give the green light. This is to grant permission to move forward with something. So green light as in stoplights. So green means go, red means stop. So if you get the green light, you can go, move forward, drive forward. If your boss gives you the green light on a project, you can move forward with that project. On the same page is to have the same understanding as someone else or to agree. So you want to make sure everyone understands and is on the same page. So you might say, before we begin the next phase of this project, I want to make sure we're all on the same page, that we all understand where we're going, what the goal is. Keep in the loop is to make sure someone has the latest information and is involved. Maybe your supervisor will say, you take the lead on this, but keep me in the loop. Continue to give me information, but you can take charge and make the decisions and make sure this happens. Touch base is to make contact or reconnect with someone briefly, and covered all bases is to do everything necessary to make sure something is successful. So both of these are baseball references. So in baseball, if you don't know it well, there are 4 bases on the ground, basically in a diamond shape. The other team, the defending team, will have someone standing in front of 3 or all of the bases actually, to try to get the other team out as they're running around trying to make a score, or trying to score a point. So basically covering all the bases, that means to do everything necessary to make sure something is successful. So the baseball team isn't going to win if they don't have someone covering third base, because then the team who's trying to score a point can continue running around, and make that point without anyone stopping them. So you want to make sure all the bases are covered. Make sure you have someone defending each base. Make sure you did everything that needs to be done to make sure that you'll win or that your project will finish successfully. Miss the mark. This means to fail to achieve the desired outcome. Unfortunately, Ben's presentation yesterday missed the mark. The executives didn't go for it, so he didn't get what he wanted. In a nutshell means to explain something in the shortest, most efficient way possible. Your coworker might say, how did the presentation go yesterday? You would respond, in a nutshell, not well. You wouldn't give them all the details about what exactly went wrong, but you would just tell them, in a nutshell, it didn't go well, we missed the mark. Red tape. These are the official rules and processes that often seem unnecessary or excessive, that delay results. They're often government rules that are in the way, that seem very bureaucratic. So things like filling out paperwork, obtaining licenses, having multiple people or committees approve a decision. This can make someone's affairs slower or more difficult. So those would be considered red tape. I think back in the past, official government and legal documents throughout history were physically bound with red tape, which is where this comes from. comes from. So it does continue into today, even though maybe the actual physical red tape is no longer used. Back to square one and back to actually all three of these, back to square one, back to the drawing board and start from scratch. These all essentially mean to start over, to begin again, to try again. So a lot of times it's after one attempt has failed, you might say, you know, oh shoot, we're back to square one, we have to try again. Start from scratch means to start at the very beginning where nothing has been done. This actually refers to racing as well. I guess back in the day, horse racing, boxing, anything that had people racing, they would begin with a scratch in the ground. So they would put a scratch in the ground and everyone would start behind it. So you're starting from scratch. You're starting from the very beginning before you start the race. And then the last three idioms that we wanted to talk about today are wrap up, call it a day, and happy hour. So wrap up and call it a day are both great to end with because wrap up means to bring to a close and call it a day means to stop working. It's great if your boss says, hey, let's call it a day early today. That means, you know, let's stop working and go home. We've accomplished enough. And then happy hour, we did talk about this before. This is a time when a bar or restaurant offers discounts on drinks and food. A lot of times coworkers will go out for happy hour to get to know each other better. So if you're invited to happy hour, you should definitely go. Maybe wait till COVID is over, but it's a great way to get to know your coworkers. And then the last point I did want to make is that you know, using idioms can make understanding really difficult for a non-native speaker. So don't be afraid to speak up if you don't understand something. Your coworkers will most likely be very happy to clarify anything for you, and stopping and asking for clarification can lead to less misunderstanding in the future. So don't be afraid to ask for that clarification or to ask questions about anything you don't understand. All right, and with that, we have reached the end of today's webinar. If you have any final questions, please do put those in the chat now so that we can answer those as we close out. But I did want to highlight that we have one final webinar next week. If you haven't been to any other ones besides this one and another one, I recommend going to next week's webinar. It's going to be a participant panel with some past interns and trainees who have come to the US through inter-exchange. They're going to talk about their experiences. So I think it'll be really great, really interesting, and I do recommend that you join. And as Tammin mentioned earlier, all of our past webinars are on our YouTube channel. So if you missed any, you can go through them at your own time, check them out on YouTube and watch those. Tammin, did we have any questions come in?
I'm only seeing one question that's come in since our last break. What should I do if I can't understand a fellow colleague or supervisor during my internship?
Yeah, so this just goes back to the prior slide, which is great because it's important that you never forget that it's okay to ask questions. This is a J1 exchange program. You're coming to learn and you're coming to experience US culture, and your coworkers and supervisors are happy to help you. They're happy to answer your questions. So feel free to respond. So feel free to ask any questions that you have. If you don't understand, you can say, oh, I'm sorry, maybe you spoke too fast or you used an idiom that I didn't understand. Can you say it again? Please repeat what you said, or please explain a little bit more thoroughly because I think I missed something. Okay, if that was the last question, then I think we are finished for today. Thank you so much for joining us. Here we do have our contact information. So if you think of any questions, please feel free to email us and we're happy to answer those.
Great. Thank you, Abby.
Thank you, Sam, and everyone have a good afternoon.